Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Today's film is a pretty fresh and recent one. Came out in February of this year, called Eloise. Now, Eloise flew completely under my radar. Did it go directly to video, or was it actually released in the theaters, Craig? What do you know about this movie?
I know very little about it. I assume that it must have gone direct to video because I had heard nothing about it. In fact, the only reason that I came across this movie is I just happened to, I was at work and I had nothing to do. Kind of a long story. I don't usually just sit around at work watching YouTube, but anyway, on this particular day I had nothing to do, so I just searched full horror movie on YouTube, and this popped up. And I had never heard of it. I had no idea what it was. I was surprised to see that it was 2017 and it was available on YouTube. It's since been pulled, so I'm sure it was posted. I'm sure it was posted illegally. But in that small window when it was available on YouTube, I watched it because I had the time, and that's it. I mean, I had never heard of it at all. I had no idea it had even existed, which kind of surprised me because it's got some big names attached to it.
Yeah, it does have, to be fair, a bit of that direct-to-video feel to it. That might be one of the criticisms that I have of the movie. But you're right, Chase Crawford is in it. I think he's been in Gossip Girl. He has a billion roles. At least 19 on IMDb. And he has the kind of face, it's that common face right now, like everybody looks like Chase Crawford.
Handsome young guy,
Yeah, dark, and you know, it's like Thor, and he just looks like about 5 or 6 different actors. And then Eliza Dushku. Yeah, and she's been in a number of things as well.
Oh, I love her. I'm a huge fan of hers, and that's really the thing that hooked me to get me to watch the movie. I thought if she was attached to it, if she was in it, it couldn't be that bad. I guess that remains to be seen. We'll see. But yeah, she, of course, most people probably know her from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. She was Faith on that, and she reprised that role on Angel, the spinoff, and then she worked with Joss Whedon. She worked with Joss Whedon again on Dollhouse, but that was short-lived. But yeah, she's been around. She's worked in the genre. She was in the original Wrong Turn. So she's worked in the genre, and I like her. She's gorgeous. She's tough. She's a cool girl. So I was that hooked me. That's what got me to watch the movie.
And even the villain in this case is Robert Patrick. And I mean, here's a person who, if you don't recognize his name, you totally recognize his face. He's been in like every movie, I think, just every movie. He has a part in it.
Yeah, he was the badass Terminator in Terminator 2. He's big guy.
Yeah, real cool. So yeah, you've got these stars, and then the director is Robert Legato, who is a visual effects whiz. I think this was his first directorial effort, or at least the most recent one. He's directed some TV shows, but no movies until now. But Titanic, he did the visual effects. Apollo 13, Hugo. Yep. Sadly, probably not a fantastic debut movie for him.
Yeah, and I was kind of surprised by that, because he'd worked on, like you said, those big movies like Titanic and Apollo 13, The New Jungle Book, which got, rave reviews for its effects. So I'm thinking, oh man, we're in for something good here. Sadly, I feel like he must have been kind of constrained by the budget.
Yeah, maybe.
While there's good attempts at visual effects here, it just doesn't seem like it had the money behind it to really be great.
Well, I sort of felt actually like the visual effects were maybe the standout part of the movie. I mean, I was watching this and I was expecting something super low budget, and clearly it was low budget, but either the technology's getting better or this guy had some friends and some tricks up his sleeve, because I was pretty impressed at how it rose above a little bit the typical kind of visual effects, transitions, and things like that you get on what I, again, assume is a straight-to-DVD movie.
Right.
I don't know, some of the parts that most intrigued me about the movie were the bits, there are a lot of flashback scenes and things, but the transitions between them are kind of inventive, and I'm sure we'll talk about some of that as we go a little later. But everything else about the movie, honestly, was not terribly inventive.
No, not really. And I I think you can probably tell from our tone already that we're not super impressed with this movie. But even before I started watching it, I looked at some of the reviews, and the reviews were not great. Frankly, I don't think it's that bad. You know, I think that it's a fine movie. It's decent. It's not great. It's not particularly unique or original. Basically, what it comes down to is a haunted asylum, and we've seen those movies before, and this doesn't do a whole lot different than what I've seen before with those movies. But really, the thing that I found most intriguing about this movie really is not anything to do with the movie at all, but it's rather just the history behind the title, Eloise, which I had never heard of this place before. But apparently this was a real asylum in Michigan. And the movie opens up with this text across the screen that says, Eloise was the largest insane asylum in the country. What started as one building in 1832 grew into 78 buildings covering 900 acres in Westland, Michigan. Rumors of inhumane testing and treatment of patients administered by Dr. H.H. Grice and a devastating fire officially closed Eloise in 1982. Only 4 of the original 78 buildings still stand. And that idea of this bizarre history of this asylum / hospital that really became its own town.
Yeah.
I mean, it was so large. It had its own post office. It had its own zip code. It had its own tavern and fire department and police station. And it really, for a very long time, from the 30s to the 80s, existed as this odd community. And I found the history just absolutely fascinating. Of course, everything that happens in the movie is fictionalized based around that historic place.
Yeah, and what is it about Michigan? Did they give off tax credits or something back in the day, back in the 1800s, for building asylums and mental health facilities there? I mean,
no idea. No idea.
Kellogg had his big famous place there as well. It was a big sprawling kind of estate thing. Pretty interesting. So yeah, anyway, clearly a slightly different history from the actual history of the facility. I think that was kind of funny, actually, about the film. A bit of a punchline for me, but I think we'll get to that later as we continue to talk about it. But yeah, the movie opens up with kind of a bookend. And honestly, in my opinion, a pretty unnecessary bookend. Usually with these kind of bookended tales, there's kind of a punchline at the end or some kind of point to some kind of extra reveal when you have this kind of thing, and there really wasn't for this movie. In fact, all it really did was serve to tell us what was going to happen.
I thought so too. I mean, it just kind of felt like an unnecessary spoiler, Like the first scene we see is kind of I guess a flashback scene. It's supposed to be at the asylum, and there's this patient, this male patient, and it's all in black and white, and he's talking to his doctor.
I just want to say, Dr. Grice, that I'm feeling a lot better today than I was yesterday, and yesterday I was feeling better than before that, and tomorrow I'm going to feel better. Doctor, please, Lori, help me. Dr. Grice, I'm fine.
Of course, this is supposed to horrify us because he's receiving this unnecessary treatment or whatever. And then I feel like there's kind of some news reports on the fire that destroyed most of the facility. And it talked about how Dr. Grice, the guy who's played by Robert Patrick, who ends up being our villain, how he was killed in the fire. And the news report talks about how the locals still to this day hear screams from the remains and still see apparitions and ghosts. And then you get to that wraparound that you talk about where we see this young woman, her name ends up being Pia, played by Eliza Dushku. It appears that she's in some sort of facility, an asylum or a hospital or something. You assume it's maybe an asylum because it appears that the windows are barred and those types of things. And she's visited by a detective who comes in and tells her that kids found Dell's body 2 days ago. Of course, we don't know who that is yet. We find out soon. And says, we also found your brother Scott's remains. All of this is just exposition delivered through this doctor. He says, because it was such an intensive gas explosion, we had to look at the dental records to identify these guys, but we were able to do that. And he says, but we didn't find Jacob. Again, we have no idea what he's talking about. And then he pulls out this this case file, and he says it's from a previous patient, and it appears like he pulls out Jacob's birth certificate and some sketches, but we can't really see what these sketches are. And then it just cuts to the title, Eloise. And then we start out in what we assume is present day, with this guy, Jacob, who's a mechanic, getting a call from his dad's lawyer. And like you said, the wraparound, the bookend, ultimately, in the beginning, I didn't really know what was going on. I'm like, okay, intrigue, that's great. But then as soon as we're introduced to Jacob, I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to get too invested in his character.
Exactly.
we know how this is going to end up.
Yeah.
But that's where the plot begins.
That's right. I also like the sort of deadpan delivery of, oh, by the way, we found your brother's body. There's no sorry for your loss. I know this must be hard for you.
Right.
It is kind of funny, and it's all kind of convoluted. The setup is pretty corny. Jacob is working on a car. Apparently he owns this body repair shop, or at least he works there, and he gets a phone call, and the phone call is it's from a guy who introduces himself as his father's lawyer, and he says, well, I haven't talked to my father in 2 years. And once again, he's like, well, your father's dead.
Yeah.
he died like 2 days ago, and we need you to come here for the funeral or for the reading of the will or something. At first I thought he said,
right.
we need you to come here for the funeral, but later on we find out that the funeral happened like 2 days ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of strange. Like, I'm sorry, even though your son is, and you might be estranged, like, you're dead now. People are going to contact your son. Somebody has to take care of you, at the end. Family members don't just get called long after the funerals of their immediate family. You know what I mean?
One would think. Yeah, one would think.
Anyway, he ends up leaving immediately, even though they've been estranged for 2 years, and even though apparently this funeral's already happened. He immediately packs all of his things, hops on his motorcycle, and just leaves the car he was working on to go to Detroit. And ends up in the office of this lawyer. And the lawyer, again, gives us a big pile of exposition. He's his only heir since he doesn't have a mother, he doesn't have a sister or anything like that, and so he's going to be getting his money. And Jacob says, well, I'm sure that's not very much. He says, oh, it's a sizable amount. There's $1.2 million in an account. However, in order to release it, we need to settle up, I guess, this other potential relative. There's an aunt that he had named Genevieve Martin, and they need proof of her death. So everybody assumes that she died at this asylum because guess what? She was a patient there, I suppose. But they need confirmation of her death, and there never was a death certificate or something like that.
Which is stupid.
It's so dumb.
It's so convoluted and stupid. Like that wouldn't happen.
No.
Right? If she was presumed dead and nobody knew where she was, oh, sorry, we're just going to hold this until there's proof, and you're responsible for providing that proof if you want the money.
Right.
Okay.
And by the way,
well then I'll just run over to the hospital and get the records. It's dumb, But I guess. That's the plan. That's what he's going to do. But before he does that, he goes to his dad's house, and it's like this big fancy house. And you can tell that all of this is set up for something, but it feels kind of clunky. And in talking about it, really, I'm being more critical than I was at the time because it all goes by very quickly. It's not like they linger on it a long time or anything, but he goes to his dad's house and he finds this weird box. I couldn't tell what it was. It looked like obviously some sort of memory box or something, but it had holes popped in the top of it for some reason, obviously that we'll find out later. And he opens it up and he pulls out a long ribbon. Don't forget about that ribbon. He pulls out a ribbon, and then he finds some pictures, presumably of his aunt. And there's pictures of the aunt. She's this pretty blonde lady, and it seems like there's also maybe pictures of a nurse or something. The lawyer had told him that his dad had killed himself by slicing his throat with a straight razor, and Jacob finds the razor in a pool of blood. This was supposed to have happened last week, and the blood is still fresh, and nobody cleaned this up or anything.
In the meantime,
man.
there are these creepy noises like happening around the house behind him that are supposed to be spooking us. And as he pulls up this razor and kind of looks in the mirror, and it's that thing where he sees his own reflection, but he sees it as his father. They're sort of trying to draw some connection or something like that. Suddenly, a guy in a ski mask surprises him from behind while he's holding the razor.
Holy shit! What the f*** are you doing with that razor?
You scared the shit out of me. What the f*** are you doing in a ski mask?
Look, I saw the lights on, took a chance. Like I was f***ing with you, okay?
Did you hear about my old man?
Yeah, man, I'm sorry.
Hey, oh.
Yo.
Oh, what, you scared of a little straight razor?
It's like, what? There's a guy in a ski mask behind you. But apparently through the ski mask, he recognizes, in a split second that it's his friend.
Yeah, no, it doesn't make any sense. In fact, what I got from this, I think that the way that I pieced it together is this guy was his friend, but this, like I'm stumbling over it because it's so ridiculous. Like, I think that Dell, this guy who's played by Brandon T. Jackson, handsome black guy, like I think that he was really there to loot the house, but it just turns out that his friend happened to be there. So he's like, oh well, since you're here, I guess never mind.
Yeah. That's another way to interpret it.
Well, right, and Jake. And like Jacob almost thinks it's funny, like haha. Like at one point he asks him like, "Hey, what time is it?" And Dell's like, "I don't know." And Jacob's like, "Oh, really? You can't check that watch you lifted from my dad's house?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I just picked that up." Like,
yeah, and he's like, "Oh,
I just thought that it was fine." Yeah, I just thought that it was hilarious that Jacob didn't care at all that his quote unquote friend was there to loot the house and just kind of got thwarted. Silly, but whatever. Moving on.
So they end up at a bar, and this is again so convoluted. They end up at a bar, and so they're sitting down, and there's a bit of byplay between Jacob and the bartender, who at first I thought, oh, this is somebody he knew. He's really super flirting with her, and he asked her for a drink called The Last Word. And I thought that was, like, meaningful. Like, I liked The Last Word, but it truly was a drink, I guess he was asking for. And then she just hands him the drink menu and says, oh, that's really funny, and hands him the drink menu so that he can, do something that she actually knows. And she comes by and she gives him the drink, and then she walks off. And, okay. So after this all kind of plays out, you realize, no, he was just flirting with her. They don't really know each other. Am I right? I'm right about this, right?
I have no idea. It was really unclear to me because they seemed to have a familiarity. It seemed like we were going to find out that they had some history, like maybe they had dated in the past or something. But
no,
and they kind of seem to kind of remain familiar throughout. But there's never anything to suggest that they knew each other. I don't know. I don't know if that was just the writing or. I don't know. I think you're right. I think that they don't have a history, but it remains unclear to me.
So as he's sitting there and he's talking with his friend, and his friend's like, oh man, I'm in a whole bunch of trouble. And he's like, well, how much trouble? It's like 20 G's trouble. He's like, 20 G's? Oh man, that's terrible. And he says, well, I might be able to help you out. And he says, well, you mean you have 20 G's just lying around? And he says, no, but I have 1.2 million I'm supposed to be getting, but I need this birth certificate or this death certificate. And if you can help me get it, I guess I'll share the money with you. And at this point, I'm thinking, why does he think he needs any help getting this death certificate? The lawyer just told him that there's an administrative office still open at this long-closed insane asylum for reasons I don't understand, but oh well. And so he just needs to go get it. So that's, as far as he knows, as far as anybody knows at this point, it's as simple as him driving down there and getting this file. Now, we're also supposed to assume that this is like, I guess, 1957, where people can't just make phone calls or fax things or email things back and forth. He's got to physically go and pick this up. So anyway, they have this deal. Okay, he's going to help him get the death certificate. So he drives his bike to this place, and he goes in, and this is, sure enough, it's kind of a fully staffed office, but it's clearly pretty well dated in the technology that they're using. This woman's like typing on a typewriter and stuff. And she goes and pulls the file out for his aunt, hands it to him. he looks through it, and the car, he's about ready to leave, but then he sees that the one thing that's missing from the file is the death certificate. It says it was remitted to the Annex. So he goes back in, and he's like, what's this mean? And the woman says, oh, yeah, the death certificate's like in our Annex. It's like our top secret, super secret files that are closed to the public. And it would need a court order in order to get this out. And he says, well, how long would that take? 5 or 6 months if we're lucky. And again, right. I was thinking back too to what the lawyer had said to him earlier, and the lawyer had suggested that without the certificate, it would take him about 5 or 6 months, right, to get the money, because they'd have to go through some other process. So right now, at this point in the story, he's facing a potential 5 or 6 months to legitimately, either way, get this $1.2 million, right? So
yeah,
like
which for $1 or $2 million doesn't really seem like that long to wait.
Like, it doesn't really. Like, what's the point? Okay, all right, we'll sit on it. We'll go through the process. So.
Right. I was just going to say I didn't want you to skip by this too quickly because, like, I feel like this movie leaves a lot of loose ends that I just didn't understand, because after Jacob asks this, I don't know, receptionist lady all about this stuff, and she gives him the info, then as he leaves, she's like, oh, wait a second, but he doesn't, and he goes, and she's filling out forms, and it looks like she's filling out an admissions form for Jacob.
Yeah.
And she fills in his name, and then, like, next to, what is he suffering from or whatever, she fills in acute claustrophobia, which we've not heard anything about. It comes up again later, but, like, it's bizarre. That never really comes up again, and it never really is explained. Like, is this whole hospital somehow supernaturally influenced? Like, are even the living people who are still working there, like, somehow, I don't know. It's bizarre. It doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
And then you're right. He runs into this guy who in the IMDb credits is just credited as the Raggedy Man. And they just have this, like, little encounter. Like, he backs up his car, and I think he hits the guy's cart or something, like shopping cart. And then he just, like, he talks to the guy briefly, and that's just it. And I'm thinking, well, this guy's going to come back around. It's going to be significant in some way. And the guy does show up again later, but just for a second, and, like, it's not explained. Like, I don't understand how he's connected in any way. Yeah. It's a little bit clunky, a little bit. It's a lot clunky, actually. And as we talk about it and we're being kind of down on it, we're making it sound terrible. And it's not terrible. It's very much on par with the kind of direct-to-video stuff you see.
Yeah.
The kind of stuff that pops up on Netflix that you've never heard of, or the kind of stuff that pops up at the Red Box that you've never heard of. And in that genre, of those low-budget movies that you've never heard of that you just pick because there's literally nothing else, within that genre, it's actually pretty good. Like, the quality is pretty good compared to other movies of that type.
Yes.
Other low budget movies. So folks, if you're getting a really negative impression, I kind of want to dispel that a little bit, because it's not awful. I didn't feel like I had wasted my time watching it, but be aware going in that it's certainly not a perfect movie, and there are going to be questions left hanging that are not going to be answered for you.
Yeah,
and if that's something that really bothers you, then maybe avoid this movie.
Yeah, and that's part of it, is we're talking about it retrospectively. When you're watching the movie, these questions are being raised, and you think, oh, okay, they're building some suspense. Clearly this is going to mean something. Clearly this is going to mean something. Oh, what is this? I expect to have that figured out by the end of the movie. But you're right, those loose ends just kind of end up dangling. And so the things that you at first attribute to mystery and suspense turn out by the end of the film to, like...
Yeah, just like red herrings.
Yeah.
It's yeah.
So,
but anyway, so Jacob goes back to Dell and says, oh, I couldn't get it or whatever. And Dell says, well, I've been doing some research, and there's this guy online named Scott who's super into Eloise. And as luck would have it, he lives in our hometown. So we've just got to run over to his house.
Yeah. And that scene is so funny because it's so contrived. I mean, first of all, the two of them are sitting in this it's a mansion of a house. Like, this is This is like Bruce Wayne's manor is what the interior of this place looks like. And they're sitting by a fireplace, and they're obviously having a couple drinks. And it's at this point in the conversation, I mean, you imagine that he called him up. He said, hey, let's go over. Let's meet at my house. They go in. They sit down. They pour some drinks. It's nighttime. They're chatting. And the whole reason for them to get together and talk, suddenly now they're talking about it. You know?
Right.
He didn't just call him up and say, hey, dude, I couldn't get the things. He says, so, did you get the stuff? And he says, no, I didn't.
Mm-hmm. So what we waiting on? Look, people breaking that place all the time just for fun.
Yeah, but how are we gonna find the fucking Annex of all places?
Look, man, you call me crazy? I've been doing some research. Check this out.
And again, the fact that Dell has done research on this place is totally unnecessary, because as far as Dell and anybody knows, all that Jacob had to do was drive to the office and get the certificate.
That's right.
So there'd be no reason for him to have done all this research. But anyway, he does. And at this point, I'm looking at the mansion around them, and I'm thinking, all right, what is the rush? Okay, I guess maybe it's because you're trying to help your friend out. But I thought, surely you don't really want this house anymore. I figure by the time you sell it, you're going to have a lot more than $20,000 in your bank account that you can hand over to your friend while you wait for that $1.2 million. But, anyway. It gets us moving on the story. Yeah,
it does. I mean, and when Dell says he's done this research, like he's pulling up things on the internet and like there's video, and I'm not really sure how there would be video of this stuff if it was really that long ago, but whatever. But it shows Dr. Grice talking about his methods, and his methods are what they call confrontational therapy, which I have no idea if that's a real thing or not. But basically what it comes down to is forcing people to face their fears. And by that, what they mean is, okay, so if you're afraid of spiders, we're going to put a lot of spiders on you. Mm-hmm. Or if you're afraid of, whatever it is that you're afraid of, we're going to make you confront that. And that's supposedly going to cure you. Of course, it all just looks very sadistic and terrible. And medical practice at that time, we look back and some of it does seem sadistic and terrible. I don't know. I assume these people had their patient's best interests in mind, but I don't think that that's what we're supposed to think here. I think we're supposed to think that this Dr. Grice, is really just kind of a sadistic guy who wants to torture people. And so that kind of sets us up for some stuff later too.
Yeah.
But they go to this expert's house, because, he's just down the street. And the guy's name is Scott, and he's this young guy played by an actor named P.J. Byrne. I didn't recognize him from anything, but it becomes clear very early on that he is in some way, I don't know. It seems like he's on the spectrum, like he's autistic or has Asperger's or something along those lines. And so they're talking to him, and Scott is all excited because he wants to go, and he's got like schematics for the buildings and stuff, so they're going to be able to find it. And then, as luck would have it, Pia, the bartender, shows up, and it turns out that she is Scott's sister. And also, coincidentally, it turns out that Pia and Scott's mom was a nurse at Eloise, and she just mysteriously left for work one day and never came home. And Pia says something like, so I was basically left to raise my brother. Now, what we see later is that when the mother dies, Pia couldn't have been more than like 6. So are we supposed to believe that 6-year-old Pia raised her autistic brother? Like,
was his brother
okay.
Was her brother even born then? Because she seems older than him. Yeah, well, it's pretty hilarious. I also like the fact that they also feel the need to break into Scott's house. Like, did they knock on the door, or was the door open and they're going through it before he surprises them?
I don't know.
You know what I'm talking about? There's that whole bit where
your guess is as good as mine.
They're prowling around in the dark in his house, and they're seeing all this creepy equipment. It's like, again, they don't flip on a light or anything, but they've got their flashlights, and there's like, ooh, there's some stuff in jars. Oh, here's this creepy medical equipment. What's going on? And then Scott has been hiding in the corner this whole time, and flips on a light behind a mannequin or something in a wheelchair, and like he planned this surprise for them. It was just another odd setup for one of those pretty standard go through the creepy house and then be surprised kind of moments,
Well, it's just like, let's create tension here just because. Like, it's not really necessary. Like, they could have just knocked on the door, but instead, let's have people creeping around in the shadows. And another thing, you know, again, we talked about how it seemed like Jacob and Pia had history, and like it almost feels like that here too, because when Pia comes in and she's like, "What are you doing? Why are you talking to my brother?" and blah blah blah, and Dell kind of says, "Oh, we just need him to take us to the hospital," and she's like, "Oh no, absolutely not." And Jacob's like, "Okay, just a second," and he takes her out in the hallway, and he's like, "But I really need to get in there," and she's like, "Okay." All right. I guess if you really need to.
It's a pretty accurate assessment.
Yeah. But nothing better happened to him, and I'm going to come along to make sure nothing happens. Like, she just gives in immediately. It's kind of silly. And so they go. I mean, and I guess that's one good thing about the movie is that it keeps moving. You know, it's not true. Boring. It's not slow. It does keep moving. As unrealistic as that may be, the action keeps going, and I do appreciate that.
But also, by this point, we kind of know what's going to happen. We've got all the characters that we heard about before all together, and we know that Jacob's going to be missing, Dell's going to be dead, Scott's going to be dead, and Pia's going to be in the mental or wherever, you know, answering questions. So it's also like a little, you know, and if there were a point by the end of the movie for revealing all that early on, it would have been okay, but as it turns out, it's just what happens. So
right. And so they go right away, and I don't even remember what the context of this is, but like it's one of those things where in literature you would just call it total crap because it's so obvious. Like when
is that the technical term, teacher man?
Exactly. Total crap. Because when foreshadowing is so obvious, like it's not even really foreshadowing, you know, like you shouldn't be able to figure out what's going to happen immediately. That removes all sense of mystery. And I feel like as they're walking to this place and they get there right away and they're just walking around outside, I feel like maybe they have to go inside somewhere that's dark and Jacob is uncomfortable going in there. And
You okay? Yeah. Just a little claustrophobic. You know, no big deal.
Everybody's afraid of something. I don't do needles.
Oh, I wouldn't say afraid necessarily.
I'm like, oh, well, then I'm sure claustrophobia and needles will never come up in this movie about conversion therapy.
Exactly. That is exactly
what was going on. Thanks for keying me in there. Oh gosh.
Yeah.
And once they get in there, then if you've seen a haunted insane asylum movie, you've seen it from here on, pretty much.
You really have. Except I don't know, it's not even as exciting as one of those because it never every scene that kind of happened, I never got chills like once in this movie. I never
No, not really.
And I was watching Into the Dark in an apartment, not at work on YouTube at my desk.
Yeah.
But like you know, they're going through the insane asylum, and you know, this was filmed on location in Eloise, and I thought that was cool. I knew it in advance.
Me too.
But honestly, they could have been anywhere because it's so dark, and they're just shining lights around. You're just seeing staircases and occasional flashes of wall and stuff. And Scott has one of these things. I actually kind of like the character of Scott, and I loved that scene where they were introduced to him because he's like flipping off the walls like a giddy schoolboy about going in there, and he's running around the room, and he's like, and they used the first X-ray was developed there, and he like pulls an X-ray off the shelf, and he's like, oh yeah, and then they used to experiment with this, and he'd go over and like get a tool off, and it's like they're all looking at each other like this guy is crazy. I can't believe we're going along with them. And it reminded me a lot of the original Independence Day. You remember the guy who's like super on about UFOs? Played by the guy who played Data or whatever, and he's just like so giddy and excited that all of this stuff that he had been learning and all this conspiracy theories and stuff that he'd been figuring out over the years are finally coming, you know, to life and becoming useful. And so like that was really neat about Scott, and he's got this phone, a cell phone with a camera in it, that he said he removed the UV filter from it so that the phone only shoots UV, which is total BS. It would shoot like everything and also UV if you remove the UV filter from it. But anyway,
it's dumb. Basically, he's trying to justify the fact that we're going to see him using this infrared camera on his like Nokia. Like,
that's right.
and this, the whole. I guess there's like 20 minutes when they're in there, just like looking around, and like they find spooky pictures of the patients, and they find all this weird stuff like babies in formaldehyde in jars, and they find this place where apparently they've kept all of the ashes from the crematorium, and Scott spills one of the jars of ashes, and it smokes mysteriously. Like, I don't know if we're supposed to think that like unlocked something.
I know.
Or,
I was thinking sorority babes in the slime ball bowlerama as soon as that happened.
Yeah,
I was like, oh
totally,
man, he tipped over the bowling trophy of the insane asylum. He let the spirit loose. But it's really not clear, like, at the end of the day, if that had any significance, because there's so many of these little things that just kind of happen that are just in there.
Right.
And even his camera, like, barely, like, he's running around with it and he is holding it up and you kind of see images. And then a little later on, as he's holding it up more and more in a room, he's seeing more. It looks like, I mean, if you were looking at this camera, you'd be freaking out because you see movement of figures in front of you that are clearly not there. Yet he's just, like, excited about it. Right? He's just like, oh, like he's moving it around, like, oh, I can see the ghosts, I can see the ghosts.
But he doesn't say anything to anybody.
No.
Like, he just kind of giggles excitedly, so nobody else knows what's going on. And, like, they're walking along in the hospital, and just weird things are happening. Like, a security monitor comes on as they walk by it. Of course, they don't see it, but, like, when the security monitor comes on, it looks like things are happening around them as though it's ghostly stuff or stuff that happened in the past, and like we're seeing it through the monitor, and it is spooky. And I have to say, there was at one point, like, Dell drops the watch that he stole from Jacob's dad, and when he drops the watch, I don't know if like the watch breaks, but it looks like time stops, and then there's a flashback, and we see, it's either black and white or like sepia tones or something, and we see orderlies beating up a guy, and then the guy in the flashback or whatever it is grabs the watch, so it's like these different time periods are existing concurrently, or maybe it's just all haunting stuff. It was a little reminiscent to me of the remake of 13 Ghosts. And while I don't think that's a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, I actually mean that as a compliment. Like, it was spooky, and it was kind of cool stuff going on, but without any explanation, without, we don't know, is this place haunted all the time? Is it haunted on just this particular day because Scott knocked over the ashes? What they're looking for, of course, are those files, and there's lots of scenes of them just going through files, which is real exciting. But eventually they find it, which again is absolutely impossible. Like, this is just this horribly rundown place with like millions of file cabinets, but eventually they find it, and when they pull it out, they're like, oh, here it is. They find the death certificate, and they're like,
So she died May 5th.
Yeah, it's 30 years ago.
to the day.
Exactly. And it's the Indiana Jones Ark storage warehouse of record rooms that they have. I mean, It is literally like a giant warehouse with filing cabinets in it. And of course, it's in this completely abandoned building, and everything's in complete disarray. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, these are the top secret sealed documents that you need a court order to get. What the hell?
No wonder you need a court order to get them. Like,
it's probably just for
they
safety
need 5 to
reasons.
6 months to find it. Right. Oh, God.
Yeah, it's pretty silly, and you're right. And while they're looking at records and people are looking at records, everybody's just like, Scotty wanders off, and so she starts looking for him, and it's just a whole big excuse for them to waste a lot of time. It ceases to become about looking for the records, except for Jacob. And everybody else is just wandering around, either exploring or looking for someone else. Or, ooh, I heard something. Right. What was that?
Well, I mean, it makes a little bit of sense, I suppose, because Scott is so interested in the history. And so it makes sense. And, his his mind wanders. So it makes sense that he would be kind of exploring. That's fine. And Dell, we know he's a crook, so it kind of makes sense that he would be looting, which is basically what he does.
I guess that makes sense.
Yeah. And Scott, eventually he kind of sees a ghost or apparition through his little camera, and he finds a picture of himself, and it looks like a picture of him being lobotomized. Oh. And then he turns around and there's like this ghost orderly, and he gets scared and he like backs up, and then he falls through the floor, like down several stories through the floor onto a gurney. And then there are these, I don't want to say spectral because it's not like they look like ghosts, No. It's just actors, but apparently I guess he has fallen
through time,
back in time, right, or it, into this spectral realm, and they take him into this room and they lobotomize him. The doctor, the bad doctor, Dr. Grice, does a frontal lobotomy, and that's it. Like,
and
Scott's dead now.
It's honestly not even that scary. I don't know. I guess it's just because, again, it's like he's fallen through time, and so here he is. He's pushed into the room. They do this lobotomy on him, and I guess at some point he dropped his phone camera, infrared camera thing. And as he's being lobotomized, we're seeing images in the camera, and the last image is, okay, he gets it pounded through his eye or whatever, and an orderly or whoever it is, attending to the surgery yanks it out of his eye. But then we see the same scene through the camera, and it's just Scott. It looks like Scott pulling it out of his own eye, like he himself, like lobotomized himself, like he was, having these delusions or whatever, the ghosts and whatnot were in his mind. But at the end of the day, the only person in the room was actually him. But that also doesn't make any sense because the camera's supposed to show ghosts. It's not supposed to show the absence of ghosts. So I was kind of confused. I was thinking, is this happening in his mind and there are no ghosts there and that's what it's trying to tell us?
Yeah, and as it turns out, that doesn't appear to be the case. It appears to be the case that these, physically manipulate their environment. It's clunky, but like you said, in the moment you just don't care. Like you just kind of go along with it, whatever. Okay, what's going to happen next? And what happens next is Dell is looting, basically, and he kind of finds a nurse's station or something, and he finds a medicine cabinet, but he has to break the glass to get into the medicine cabinet, and he does, and he's pulling out all the medicine, but then he realizes that he's cut his hand pretty badly in breaking the cabinet, and so I guess he thinks that whatever medicine is in the cabinet must be an antiseptic.
Without reading it.
Right. So he just pours this jar onto his hand, and then the camera closes up on it, and it's LSD.
It's a jar of LSD, and he just pours it on his hand.
Which would be probably like hundreds of doses of LSD that he's pouring into a flesh wound. And so then he goes, okay, so Pia and Jacob have found the records. They want to get out of there. They're looking around. They can't find Scott. They're looking for Scott. They eventually find Dell. And Dell's there, and it only takes a few seconds before he starts to freak out. And again, it's the whole, is Dell now seeing ghosts because he's tripping on LSD, or are the ghosts really there? Who knows? Who cares? But he starts seeing ghosts. And he freaks out and he pulls out a gun and just starts shooting haphazardly everywhere. And he takes off running. Pia and Jacob run off trying to find him, but they can't find him. And Dell ends up in this room. And I don't even remember how this happens. The room floods. Oh, God. Somehow.
I don't know. Well, he stumbles across a giant glowing cross or and a bunch of people, like inmates, and we're seeing visions. And all of this that we've been talking about with Dell and everything that we talked about with Scotty has actually been happening concurrently. Like it's been cutting between these two things. And so we're an hour into the movie, and it feels like we've had nothing but build up to this point. Like I was waiting for, the axe to fall. And it just took so long. It took so long for Dell, for Scotty to finally get lobotomized and for Dell to finally drown in this flooding room, which was totally unclear. You feel like you're getting built up. Like you still, even when these two deaths happen, you still don't know exactly what's going on. And we're already like an hour into the movie and we don't have a clear sense, what we're looking out for. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I feel like it's at this point that it really kind of takes a turn and it just becomes full on supernatural. Pia and Jacob find Scotty, and Pia freaks out for a second, and then they just try to run away, and they, all of a sudden it's like they're thrust into the past, and all of these orderlies and nurses and patients are around, and like they witness something going on like in a day room, and I couldn't even really understand what was going on. Like it's like the orderlies and nurses were like dancing with the patients, and some of the patients were like nude or semi-nude, and like
that scene is hilarious because it goes on forever. Like the camera swings dramatically around the two of them as they're all like back to back looking around the room, and the room is turned sepia tone, and around them there's all this, these, like every stereotype that you could imagine of an inmate in an asylum. Bad teeth, crazy laughter, drawing weird paintings and pictures, missing limbs and deformed arms. Any one of these things is happening all around them. And it keeps switching between all these crazy images and this camera continually whipping around them, and Jacob's like rubbing his eyes like, what? And then it's like, goes back to a guy painting a creepy painting, and then we're back to him rubbing his eyes again going, what? Am I really seeing this? And it goes back and forth like 6 times. And I'm like, man, this scene has gone on for like 5 minutes.
And ultimately, it was just to kind of, I guess, show us the horrors of what was going on in the asylum. And once they've witnessed it wide-eyed for 5 minutes, they run outside, and we had seen earlier that like there were guards or cops patrolling or something, like they had to hide at one point when they first got in there. And so Pia runs out. I feel like Jacob for some reason gets caught up inside there, but Pia runs out, and when she runs out into real time, and it's raining, and there's a cop outside, and she says, my friend's in there, can you please go get him? And the cop runs inside, and then all of a sudden the rain stops and it flips back into old-timey again, and a cop comes out with Jacob, I think, and they end up being sat in the cop car for a little while before they end up going back in. And I'm sure there's more to it than that. I don't remember. It's not really important. They get back in there, and this is where pieces start to fall into place, I guess. They end up in this like surgical theater. Pia is strapped down in there, and Dr. Geis is talking about the conversion therapy.
We have 2 interesting case studies today. This patient suffers from an acute form of claustrophobia, the most severe and frightening of which is specifically the fear of waking up and discovering that you're buried alive. So when his anesthesia wears off, he'll find himself in a morgue drawer, forcing him to face his ultimate fear. And perhaps you're wondering why he's gagged. Well, when he comes to, we wouldn't want him to wake the dead.
Pia is afraid of needles, so I'm going to let the nurse take over because I've got an important birth to deal with. And then there's a terribly disgusting scene of Pia just being stabbed repeatedly with these huge needles. And I say stabbed, they're stabbing her in the arm, but it's gross. Like, yeah. I guess I have to give it some credit for the effects here, because I was cringing at this point. I don't like needles either. And they're stabbing these huge needles into her arm, and it looks pretty real. It's pretty good.
It looks like this might be an actual scene from the past that they're reliving, because it occasionally goes up to the students who are up in the theater watching this, and they're one by one kind of getting up and walking out disgusted.
Right.
Like this was maybe an actual demonstration. And so I was thinking, again, at this point, you say it becomes totally supernatural. I felt like the movie became like a time travel movie. Because
it's weird.
It's not like it's going back and forth between these flashbacks and the real world at this point. It's all flashback supernatural that they're in. And she manages to escape. She ends up yanking her restraints out of the chair, grabs a needle, stabs a nurse, pushes another one down, and runs out. And then, so we're in this supernatural world, the ghostly world that they're supposed to be in. And she is in the hallway of this asylum, and it's really busy. There are people going back and forth, and she grabs a nurse's uniform, goes into the toilet, changes, and now she's able to sneak around the ghosts by being dressed as a nurse and acting normal. It's just tonally, it just totally changes to this like sneaky heist kind of movie.
Yep. And the thing that I was thinking about, like she's running around, she's dressed as the nurse, whatever. Eventually she gets Jacob out of the morgue, and they're both kind of running around observing what's happening, and we see some important things. But the whole time I was thinking, oh, so I guess she's just fine now after like being
the needles
totally brutalized with the. She's fine. She's over it. Like
right.
Her arms are cool. She can push around a wheelchair. No big deal. But okay, so now they're both out, and they're just kind of observing what's going on. They see Jacob's aunt, or she's like in a delivery room, and that was another thing. Like, they had said earlier that Pia's mom had worked in the nursery, and I'm like, why do they need a nursery in an insane asylum? Like, this doesn't even make sense. Now, historically, the real Eloise was originally a poorhouse, and then it became an asylum, and then it was also a hospital. So I guess, fine, in the hospital part, they had a nursery or whatever. But this woman is giving birth, and we know that it's Jacob's aunt because we've seen her before, and she's giving birth, and Geist delivers the baby, and then he goes away. And then this nurse, who we've seen in pictures, we know is Pia's mom. Ooh, look at all the pieces falling together. Pia's mom goes in there, and at that point, like I feel like Jacob just figures this out somehow easily, that this woman was not really his aunt, it was really his mother, and he had been born in there. And like, he goes in and has a heartwarming moment with her before she dies, but then as the nurse is coming in, like, he slips under the bed or something, and the nurse, I feel like Pia's mom, or no, excuse me, Jacob's mom whispers something to Pia's mom, and then Pia's mom says, "Don't worry, Jen. This is one baby who won't grow up in this place. I don't care who his father is. I'll call your brother right now." And then she leaves, and we see that Jacob's under the bed, and we see that Genevieve is bleeding out, and blood drips through the mattress. Because, why wouldn't it?
So much blood.
Into Jacob's mouth. Did you notice that the blood dripped into his mouth?
Well,
like,
I'll tell you what I noticed was that this guy who's claustrophobic seemed to have no problem hiding under the bed.
Oh God, yeah. Okay. So then Genevieve dies, and the nurse puts the baby in this box. Oh, we've seen this box before. It's the box from earlier on, and she pokes holes in the box before she puts him in there, and she puts the baby in there, and she Pia apparently had been at work with her mom that day. The brother Scott had said, "Sometimes mom took you to work." Okay, so we remember that. And so she puts the baby in this box, and she takes the hair bow out of Pia's hair. Remember? Told you, ribbon, important. And she ties up the box, and she gives it to Pia, and she says, "There's going to be a man outside waiting. Take this box out to him." Adult Jacob. And Pia, I don't know why, but Jacob decides that he needs to start the fire. The fire that took down Eloise. And so he starts it, and they try to run out, and Pia gets out, and Pia sees herself as a young child give the box to Jacob's quote unquote dad. But for whatever reason, Jacob gets grabbed by an orderly and pulled back in, and then immediately it pops back into the present. And there are real life, real-time firefighters there and real-time cops there. And Pia's like, "My friend's still in there. You got to go in him. Go get him." She tries to run back in, but they won't let her in. And then we cut back to the bookend. Mm-hmm. And here we are.
And that's it. I mean, the bookend doesn't tell you anything. The detective just throws his arms up in the air and says, "What really happened to Jacob in that fire yesterday?" She doesn't respond. He's like, "All right." He leaves the room. She opens up the box, and she goes through the photos, flicks through a bunch of drawings of all of them.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure where those came from.
I'm not either. Why would there have been drawings of them in that box or in that file? Like the Genevieve, the mom, had been like psychic and had sketched them all, back in her day.
I feel like it was supposed to be like because we saw drawings similar to that during that weird scene where they were, so the room was spinning around them and they saw all the crazy people drawing and painting. But again, it would be way too supernatural for, something like that to be there now in this scene. It would have more significance, and she's just kind of tossing him in the box as we're hearing the voices of previous dialogue that was said in the movie, as though it were significant, and it's really not. And then we get a closing shot, basically, of Jacob, who's back. Apparently, when he was pulled into the building, he was pulled, back into the past, and he's back in his morgue spot, screaming in his box, and the doctor is back in his asylum, and a nurse comes by with a certificate. Is it it's like a death certificate or something?
I think it's a birth certificate.
But, it's got his name on it, Jacob's name on it, and the doctor circles born alive but now dead.
Right.
And he hands it back to her,
right.
And she smiles, and he walks up the stairs, and then we get this film is dedicated to the memory of Eloise's former patients, their families, and the staff of Eloise. This
isn't that nice?
This heartwarming tale is dedicated to all the wonderful people who made this happen. Like, what? And then
I'm sure that the families are very thankful.
I'm sure they are, especially when you wait through the credits. Did you wait through the credits?
No.
At the very end, I kid you not. At the very end, there's a notice. It's back where it says no animals were harmed. In the making of this picture,
right.
That far into the credits, it says, during the operation of the Eloise Hospital Complex as a sanatorium and hospital, it was considered one of the foremost treatment centers in the world. It was well known and respected for its ethical and charitable treatments of its residents. While Eloise is an actual place, the events and characters that were portrayed in this picture are fictional. The producers acknowledge that this fictional storyline does not reflect any method of treatment or care that was provided by the faculty during the time that it was operating as a functioning sanatorium or hospital. So
that's hilarious. What a lovely tribute.
Right. As a tribute to the hardworking staff of this well-respected institution, we made up a bullshit story about a doctor who terrorized and mutilated patients.
Oh, gosh, that's funny.
Oh, my God.
Oh, it's funny. I have had a really good time goofing on this movie with you. I really have. It's been a lot of fun. It's been some good laughs. But honestly, folks, the movie,
it's
as
not terrible.
A relatively low budget horror movie, it's not that bad.
No.
I don't regret watching it. It held my interest for the hour and a half. The acting was not bad at all.
No.
It was actually pretty good.
Yeah.
The cinematography was okay, pretty good, some decent effects, some interesting things going on. I have a feeling that it didn't look or feel as cheap as it probably actually was. And so I have to give it some credit for that.
Yeah, I'm with you on that too. We've seen so much worse, and the worst thing you can say about it is it's kind of pedestrian.
Sure.
Except for the fact that Eloise just clearly had a lot of great material to mine. I mean, what a fantastic location and a great hospital history.
Yeah.
Even if it was a whole total bullshit story about it.
Right.
It's kind of a letdown in that way, that it ended up being kind of what it was. But I enjoyed watching it too, and I didn't walk out of it really angry or upset. It just felt like kind of a clunky mess.
Yeah. And really, if anything, it piqued my interest in the actual history. Like I'm legitimately interested in going and reading more about this place because it just seems like such a fascinating place. So I don't know.
Let's go, Craig.
This
road trip.
Right. I would go. I would totally check it out. I think it would be neat because I guess there's only like 1 or 2 buildings that still stand, but they're still operational. Now, they're not hospitals or anything anymore. They've housed businesses and like law offices and things. But there's a couple of the original buildings still standing where they filmed this. And I guess the ruins of some of the buildings are still there too. And it would be kind of a cool place if you happened to be in Michigan and happened to be in that area. You know, such a big place obviously affected a lot of people, a lot of history there. That's interesting. So I at least appreciate the movie for bringing that into my consciousness, and I probably will look into it a little bit more. Don't worry, I won't bore you with it, but for me, I took that away from it. I didn't not like the movie. I didn't love it. I didn't think it was great. I thought it was fine. You know, it was entertaining. Lots of loose ends, lots of plot holes, but not boring, quick-paced. Horror fans, I would recommend it. You're looking for something to watch on a Saturday night, you can't find something else, go to the Red Box, pick up Eloise. I don't think that you'll be terribly disappointed.
Yeah, but, I mean, were you ever scared? I mean, was there anything remotely scary about this to you?
The needles. The needles were freaky.
That was freaky. Yeah, and especially if you don't have a thing for needles, that would scare the heck out of you.
Who has a thing for needles?
That's true. Ooh,
who
some
wants
people
to be stabbed? I guess.
I'll say one thing. You know, it kind of fell short of some interesting directions it could have gone. In that, I thought by the end of the movie that they were trying to imply somehow that these characters had a role in their own history.
Yeah.
At the point at which he is the one who started that fire in 1980, you know?
Yep.
And he has that moment with his mother. You can almost imagine his mother, you know, seeing him as a ghost. But that wouldn't make any... And then even when the doctor, you know, signs that certificate saying, but now dead. But it doesn't. I mean, it can't be that way, because that would then mean that Jacob now doesn't exist. You know, it would have to be one of these weird paradoxes that wouldn't play out, right? You know, in the bookend where Pia still knows about Jacob and all that. So, yeah, it was
right. And because the movie is so new, and I think it's going to end up being so obscure, we'll probably never know what the original intentions are. I think that you're right. That is interesting, and you could read that in that they had some impact on their own history, and maybe there was more of that intended, and for whatever reason it just didn't play, or because of edits or whatever, it didn't come across. And we'll probably never know. Sadly,
the secrets of Eloise are going to remain locked up forever.
The secrets of Eloise. Yeah, I do think that there was some potential that was not fully utilized, but I didn't hate it. It was what it was, and it was fine, and it was entertaining at work for an hour and a half when I had nothing else to do. And so if you ever find yourself at work, hop in Eloise.
High praise from two guys in a chainsaw.
That's right.
Well, thank you again for listening to another episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with a friend. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. You can also find us on Facebook, where we encourage you to let us know what you thought of this film, what you thought of our assessment of it, and also let us know what other movies you'd like us to see. We do requests fairly often on this show. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With two guys and a chainsaw.